Cam, the biggest game in youth football in Australia. What is it? Go.
Well, the Sydney Derby, of course, Dylan. Had my first experience of that on the weekend. The El Clasico of youth football in Australia. Um, Great experience, fantastic quality, and just the level and the intensity from 13s through the 18s was brilliant. Of course, the mighty under 18s, red and black, had a brilliant day out. But
What was the
just
score?
to be able to see that, being a passionate the score. Oh, well, I'm glad you asked, Dylan.
I know you've been
Yeah.
itching to tell us.
Well, look, let's just say it was a five-star performance, and
Cool.
and 5-0,
Oh, wow.
which no one was expecting. Yeah, 5-0, and on a day where the results didn't go our way,
Yep.
for the Wanderers, it was a great way to finish off for the club, and we had a number of players out. We got youth internationals away in the senior space in the NPL and everything else. A bunch of injuries.
Mm.
But the boys just brought everything that we've been working with them on together on the day,
Yep.
and it was just really awesome to see. And when two sets of elite players just go at it across all the age groups,
Yep.
but when they go at it, they sort of bring themselves, all of them, to another level.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
that's what I saw throughout the day, and certainly that's what our 18s brought, and yeah, credit to them because it was a brilliant performance.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, for those that don't know, you're obviously the under 18s coach at Western Sydney Wanderers, starting as of this year. How have you found it so far? We'll dive into your journey and what sort of led you there previously, but brand new season, new start. We're only early, few weeks in. What's it been like?
Yeah, a few weeks in, but about 5 to 6 months in terms of where I've been at with the club since last year, starting with preseason, which I think was October. So um, yeah, we're only 7 or 8 games in, I think it is,
Yep.
and a 30 game season plus finals. So a long way to go still, but
Mm.
mate, just a brilliant experience. I know you well, you know my history well. I was getting involved in an A League club, was really the only space that I was probably going to consider at a youth head coach level.
Yep.
And the Wanderers seems to be the perfect mix for myself personally. And their approach as a club from 13s through to the A League,
Hmm.
the individuals inside the club, who a number of whom I know really, really well. So, and of course, the setup and the facility at Wanderers
It's
is second to
fantastic.
none. I think maybe the new facility and setup in Melbourne with Melbourne City, I think from what I hear is top notch
Yep.
as well, and maybe the best in the country. But Wanderers wouldn't be far off that. It's just an amazing facility. European standards. When the first time I walked in to that setup, it reminded me of the UK. It was better than a lot of the clubs in the
Yeah. Wow.
UK in my time, albeit that's, almost a quarter of a century ago now, and they have improved as well.
Yep.
But that's the sort of standard, and that's the sort of stuff would be great to see across the entire country in
Mm.
due course. But it takes money, it takes funding, it takes time. But just to be able to be in that environment inside a fully professional club and be able to work with Australian football's next generation of players, that's my passion point. Loving every second of it, developing myself individually inside of that, stretching thinking, ways of approaching my methodology and approach inside of that context. Yeah, mate, loving it. It's been a brilliant experience.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know firsthand that these boys are in safe hands at the moment. And there's, funnily enough, I've actually spoken to players in your team, and I've had feedback from parents, and it's all been top notch so far. And one of the main things that I've sort of had the feedback from, it's always it's always positive. It comes out of your mouth, and I noticed this when I was coaching with you, and that's something that you know I think maybe a lot of coaches in this country could take a few tips from you. It's that constant positivity. You know, when a player does something wrong, it's problem solving, but it's also trying to lift them up and encourage them when they do well. And it's nice to see that I've seen that, but also parents that you're working with now, even going up into the A League space, that they're seeing that as well.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny because at Wanderers, the parents aren't allowed to come into the training sessions. So
Okay.
they'll only get a taste of me from secondhand through their kid.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting insight that you've given me there. But then also what they see of me on the weekend. And if they see me on the weekend, they're probably going to be thinking, this guy's a nutcase. But because you know the emotion and the passion that I bring to it. And when we're talking about elite 15, 16, 17, 18 year olds, we're talking about, um, from my experience, hitting on all of my learnings to them and being soft and just positive and fluffy is not going to get an outcome. So there's a balance in between accountability and positivity,
Mm,
right? Which I think is, for me, where the art of coaching lies, especially in youth football, keeping the reality of a youth in mind, right? With
mm.
your expectations is so important to delivering and getting outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And that's why whatever I've ever done at a coaching level, and the main passion point I've had is having the person at the center.
Mm,
Because unless the person um, is in a safe space, but also a stretch space, then they're never going to get, or and I'm never going to get as a coach the outcomes I want from them as a player.
mm.
So the hopefully that environment and everything that we do as Wanderers as a football club, but then also inside the 18 space specifically, is creating that for them and allowing them to be pulled and be stretched, but also understand that it's in a safe space to do that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's down to them. Accountability is on the player to be able to deliver.
Yeah.
And I'll always hold them to those standards so I can keep pushing them beyond that, but in a positive way, because it's the only way you get outcomes, in my view.
That's fair. So you talk about this environment that you're creating there, where you obviously make them feel safe, but at the same time, stretched. If I'm a young player and I'm in an A League academy, how am I navigating my way to the first team in your eyes?
Working hard, working hard, and this is one thing I'm working, and I never have the ability to stop working on with the players in my space and whoever. We've got a funnel coming through, so I'm getting new players all the time as players go on, and we do our job in terms of supporting them with their development. They move up the chain,
Yeah.
right, and they move into NPL senior space and then A League, hopefully, and beyond. And so new players coming through is just part of it, and just introducing them, and then reaffirming to the players who have been with me through the whole process of the fact that every single training session matters,
Mm,
right? And how do you get to the higher level? I tell you what, you just have to work hard and at every single session. And I don't mean like old school working hard, like they would have hammered us in the UK or even in the NSL days on just, running and working up. That's part of it. But I mean actually being working hard with your focus and your concentration.
mm.
That means your ability to be coached, right? To learn and absorb, to really think about the messages coming through to you
Yeah.
as a player, and then how are you going to apply it, right, inside of your session? And in that hour and a half that you've got, how can you apply that to the best of your ability, mentally and physically,
Mm,
technically, intellectually, to get the most out of that session, right? The players who take that mindset into every session and they do it time and time and time again are the ones that will eventually get that little extra 1% that's going to give them the opportunity to go to high levels. The
mm,
ones who cruise it, right, and that they never understand that for whatever reason, are the ones that will always struggle to get to that next level, because now the margins are very, very fine
mm,
between these players, right? And to get to the high level, you need to somehow break out of an already elite group.
mm.
So, how you apply yourself in every single training session, for me, and outside of that as well, what you're doing or not doing, how you're looking after your body, your sleep, everything is going to be the thing that adds up over these 2, 3, maybe 4 years, if you're lucky, of your footballing career,
Mm,
and will define what happens next.
mm. Do you have any kids that cruise through? in your sessions?
Well, yeah, I went there at the start of that last point, and then I digressed to my bigger monologue.
All right.
But
We
but
love
that's
your
where I was
monologues.
at.
They can keep coming.
But that's where I was actually going with that because it is a never-ending
Mm,
message. And so, in answer to your question, yes, every player, every human being has the ability to cruise,
yeah.
right? Oh, they have the ability to, they have the default in my mind to cruise. Even myself in business, in coaching, in anything, right? So it takes discipline to
Mm,
not cruise, right? And that's the thing. And every single day, every single session, therefore, requires a reset of that discipline, of that mindset, of
mm,
that approach. You don't just learn it, get it, and then you've got it like for the rest of your life. You get better at it, but every single time you get better at reapplying that discipline in every session. So I would say that everyone, as long as they're a human being, is in the same space of having to reapply the disciplines required to focus, concentrate, and work hard, learn and grow at every single session.
mm.
And the ones, again, that do that more consistently
Yeah,
over a period of time will get the results that they want.
100%. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Let's talk about your football journey growing up and where that led you.
Yep. So 5, 6 years old, grassroots football, loved it. Like I still got memories burnt in my mind of the local pitch and like local
Me too.
football. We played. It's just the best, right?
Yeah.
And this is where, as a coach, now I don't lose those because that's why I do it. And so every time I look at a kid of a certain age, my mind immediately transports back to myself and what I did or didn't know and what I was learning and that experience. And I try to always I don't try, just sort of naturally put myself in their shoes because there's different things required at different ages with it all. And having the empathy for the kid is important in that. And that's where it all started for me. That's where my love for the game started, um, and I need that to continue and that passion for the rest of my coaching career. Otherwise, I won't be able to be an effective coach. So I went through grassroots. I went into then representative football, started about under 11s back
Mm,
then in the 90s when I came through. Then was starting to be selected for what we had. We had a very good structure back then, right?
no, we've
And
spoken
I
about
wish
this a lot. Yeah.
yeah. And look, I don't want to reverse the clock. It's too hard to reverse this, but boy, the structure and the flow, and if you want to call it the pathway, was
Yep.
so much better back then because it was representative football, which was association based for your
Yep.
region. That's what representative football is, not whoever wants to get the next license.
Yep.
Representative football, right? That then went into the next tier, which was zone, which was a few associations together, right? Or a few clubs together.
Mm,
Then from zone to state, right? And then state international team. Seems so obvious,
yep.
right? But it was just so good in that funnel of players and also didn't cut off the pool too early,
Mm,
right? Because what happened is you've got representative players all around, but then you've got a zone and you've got a quite a large catchment of so our zone was Ku-ring-gai, now Northern Tigers, Gleysville Hornsby, now Spirit FC,
yep.
and Manly, which is now Manly United. That was our zone. That's a pretty, by today's standards, that's a pretty impressive catchment of players that you have to pull 20 out of for every age group. So already it's quite limited, but that model allowed a bigger pool, and then that then funneled again into the state, and then again into national teams. So the talent ID, the ability for players to be noticed and identified as they grow and develop along this journey became significantly easier.
Mm,
I'm assuming for coaches and for those involved in selecting high level team, state and national above that. And yeah, it was a fantastic model that I was a part of. That then, so I went into zone, and then zone. I was actually then at about 13, 14, I was cut from my
mm.
local rep team, which then was Gleysville Hornsby.
What was the feedback
And
to why you were cut?
well, the only reason was I was too small, too slow,
Yep.
right? And both those factors were true. I was too small, too slow, um, and the reality of the situation is, right, some of that I couldn't control.
Yep.
I wasn't an early developer, so I I had to wait to grow, but also I didn't have the biomechanical movements required to ever be fast. So it was the best thing that ever happened for me because it made me and my parents, but
No.
really me driving. I was always driving my parents, and they were there to support. And that I think they were the best example of football parents because they weren't ever driving and pushing me. I was the one asking them. So the first thing I said after bawling my eyes out for about 2 weeks, right, was okay, well, if I'm too slow, I want to do sprint training. So, Dad, can you find sprint training? So, Dad's role then at that particular point was to hunt down someone who's going
Yep.
to train his son to be fast sprinter, right? Not do it himself, not like, find a way. And he did that. And then I did sprint training just, I think it was once a week on a Sunday morning at the local athletics club. But we found a guy that was really good, a little bit further away. And I just did that consistently for 2 years,
Yep.
right? Sunday mornings, Dad would jog around the pitch, Mount Colah, Foxglove Oval. Mate, wasn't pretty on a Sunday morning in the middle of winter. But this coach really invested into me, and it was just the consistency of that one training a week, not for the repetitions, but for realigning my biomechanics. That over a period of time, every time I ran in the 6 days in between that, I was having those messages reaffirmed into what I was doing. That then eventually made me faster. And then fast forward 2 years or so, I then was selected in that funnel into the state team.
Yep.
And the state team was then part of the national team camp, which I was invited into in preparation for the 1999 FIFA World Cup, under 17 FIFA World
17s,
Cup.
yep.
So
That was
gone
held
from
in
being cut off.
Australia, wasn't it? That
Oh, say it again.
was that the one that was held in Australia?
No, so that was held in New Zealand, and
Okay.
we made it. So that group of players, the which I wasn't on the plane for, but part of the national team camp in preparation for it, that group made it to the final
Wow.
against Brazil, right? So 1999, we're talking about the potentially the best crop of footballers we ever had in that age group.
Mm,
And some of the best crop of footballers in the world, right?
yeah.
And that was on either side of that, we had success at a youth level, starting with in 93, Barcelona, Olympic Games. I think we were maybe bronze. So this youth generation was really, really powerful time in Australian football. We had a lot of players from that particular generation that I was playing with and training with went to Leeds. We had a connection with
Yep.
Leeds through Soccer New South Wales at the time. There was a heap of them,
That's me with the
five,
Dukas,
six
Harry
of them.
Gills. They all.
Harry Gill was a little bit before. Brett Edmonton was also offered a spot at Leeds, but we had Brad Groves, Kennesville Sheriff, McMaster, a few Central Coast boys, by the way, in that mix. They all came, and it was more as well. Just can't remember off the top of my head. All went to Leeds.
Yeah.
DJ Gareth Eds, good
Okay.
mate of mine, now running an
Run
academy
Academy. Yep.
in Eds football in northern Queensland. Just like Australian football and youth footballs were seen as the highest level in the world at that point, right?
Mm,
Interesting to think about that. Like we were sometimes that generation, my generation, was seen as maybe what Spanish players are seen like today,
yeah.
perhaps, which is really interesting because then I was invited off the back of that and that experience. I then made my way into the NSL setup, where Sydney Olympic first. In the youth, and they had the National Youth League back then, which I thought was a absolutely brilliant concept, which is essentially the reserve grade to senior football in the NSL.
Mm,
But as I made it into Sydney Olympic, and then I went to Northern Spirit the next year, and then Newcastle United after that. When I was at Northern Spirit, I was then invited for my first trial over to the UK with Aston Villa
yep.
at 17 years old or almost 18, and then started 4 years of back and forth and trialing and playing in the UK with various clubs, and then obviously the journey of a young footballer with injuries and then homesickness and um,
How did you cope with that? Being away from home, the injuries,
oh,
homesickness, everything
it's
that came with it.
really tough, to be honest. I think that's probably the biggest reason why Australian footballers don't persist in Europe. I think because it's very hard to dig in.
Mm,
And you look at the Lucas Neals, the Timmy Cahills, these boys didn't just walk into the UK and just make it,
Mm.
right? They all had to dig in, and they had to dig in lower leagues, and then eventually they had their opportunity, and then they became the superstars that they became, right?
Yeah.
So homesickness and the attraction of coming back to a Sydney beach, right,
Mhm.
and living a nice, cozy lifestyle, and especially now with the A League, you can know we didn't have the ability to come back and earn a full-time professional wage, a proper one,
Yeah.
right? They do now in the A League. So it's you look at that, yeah, okay, I can dig it out here, dig my heels in here in Europe, in the UK to try to achieve something, or I can go back and earn a good wage and play A League professional football
Mm.
in the best country in the world, right? So that I feel is probably one of the main reasons why we don't see the same amount of players
That's fair.
digging their heels in Europe in those ages now.
Mm.
And that could be right or wrong, right? Everyone's choice is different in that respect. But
Definitely
for
some truth to
me,
it.
say that again.
But there's definitely some truth to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, that homesickness and that attraction of Australia was hard. Injuries also, I had some bad injuries that I had to come back for anyway. But ultimately, it provided me amazing experiences. I had the opportunity to play with Stoke City under Tony Pulis, um, who went on and did 10 to 15 years in the Premier League. I think one of the longest serving
Yeah.
Premier League managers with Crystal Palace, with Stoke City and West Brom,
Yeah.
and an amazing person as well.
Yeah.
Person-centered coach that I really resonated with. He was so supportive of me, provided me the opportunity to play every single day. I was training with the first team, right,
Wow.
in the championship squad. We had a player, I can't even remember his name, Dutch player who had just played. He played in Euro '96, and I just remember watching a few years at the back of his career, just watching him ping balls. It was just like I was like, how do I get to that level, right? It
Yeah.
was just
Wow.
but I'm training and playing with these guys and part of it and fit in well and then played with the reserves. But even preparations for match days, that whole experience. Ben Foster was our goalkeeper in the youth reserves. He went on and had an amazing career
Yeah.
with Manchester United. Obviously, big YouTube sensation these days. Almost broke my leg in training in one session as well. Honestly, that guy's got legs like tree trunks,
Really.
right? And went one on one with him, and I never did that again because he went straight through me. Um, and but great guy, great experiences. Came back after that and played in. There was no A League there, and there was no
Yeah.
NSL. So there was about 6 months left of it, right? And and then I played in the what was probably considered the interim national league.
Yeah.
So played in that, which was like all the old national league clubs mixed with the existing ones in a 16 team comp, which is awesome. All the NSL players were playing,
Yep.
cracking competition, and then the A League started, and then for me, just with how life worked out and my career from there and the financial side of it, it made more sense to play professionally in a part-time level, whilst also working in the corporate space as well.
Mm.
And that's what I did for the next 10 years, before then somehow being roped back in to football, full-time football as an academy director. Now, yeah, at A League Academy head coach, and mate, it's football is my life.
Yeah.
Outside my faith, football is and my family, football is my life. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. What was it like that sort of that bridging period before the A League started in that NSL sort of space? Like you mentioned something before. Was it like an interim league for a couple of years with a few
So
teams?
I'm going to paint a perfect picture to answer that question.
Yeah.
Did you see the Preston
Yeah. Loved it.
game? That's what it was.
Wow.
Right. Now, not every game was at that level and that intensity and the flares and everything else, but mate, that's the type of atmosphere. That was the
Mm.
type of culture that we need to get back in Australian football.
Yeah.
But that's what that interim national league was. It was called the Soccer New South Wales Premier League or something at the time, but it was essentially the national league, apart from the Victorian clubs and maybe one Brisbane, one Perth. But it was 16 team comp, like heaps of games. They actually split it in this crazy format
Mm.
midway through. That you had an 8 and an 8, right?
Okay. Well, they do
I
something
guess, to
similar up in
accommodate.
Scotland, don't they? I think halfway through the season they split it off and then they, they let the top teams play against each other.
I don't know, but it was like, and then the funny thing was, you played that in the second round. You played the top eight played them, and the top four I think went through to the finals,
Yep.
and the bottom eight played, but the one who won the bottom eight got a wild card into the finals.
Really?
Right? Super cool concept.
Yeah, brilliant.
And mate, I just remember St George Stadium. I remember um, uh, Denzer Park, and some of the battles there, Bonnyrigg and Sydney United, and it's some stuff that's like, not great as well. The main feeling that I got around all that, it was proper football culture, embracing the multicultural society that we are in Australia, right? And football then came out of that in a beautiful way. And I
Mm.
think hopefully with this new tier in Australian football coming through, we can sort of bring a little bit of that back.
Well, it's going to be the
But
next
we
question.
need to
Yeah.
bring that soul back to football in this country. And I think embracing our culture, embracing our history, embracing who we are as a country, which is a multicultural society,
Yeah.
right? Football can embrace that better than any other sporting code in Australia, in my view. And I'm hopeful over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we can bring that back with more money in the game, more support, and some of the initiatives that are happening now.
Do you think this championship's going to be successful? No, the championship, for people who don't know, that's going to be the second tier of professional competition in Australia.
It'll only not be successful if we stuff it up again, because it has to be successful in the sense that it's a positive. The teams that are all in the comp, right, are going to add so much colour and flavour. We
Yeah,
saw that the other week,
100%.
right, with the Macedonian derby in Victoria, right? So it can only not work if politics get in the way, right? And we don't allow it to grow beyond that, because it needs to grow beyond just that one small competition. And okay, that's fine. Let it be a starting point, but as long as we're legitimate around growing it and then building it into the fabric of the top level professional game, then over a period of time, the soul of all of it will start to infiltrate every part
Yeah,
of our top level of professional football. So for me, yes, it's a fantastic initiative. Needs a lot of work to get to where it needs to get to, but it needs to happen, and it's a starting point, and I'm excited to
agreed.
see
Yeah.
how it plays out. Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what it's going to look like in year one. I've said I think you're going to see bigger crowds at these championship games than what you do at some of the A-League grounds. I mean, one of the best fixtures on the calendar is, Sydney v Wanderers every year, and massive crowds come out and, sometimes they'll back out the Allianz, they'll pack out Parramatta. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what it's going to be like when some of these sleeping giants as such come into play and what that's going to do for A-League crowds and what it's going to do to the championship. I think it's going to be very curious.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, but like I said before, I think it's the injection Australian football needed at a top level,
Yeah,
um, and and look, there's other things that we need to do aligned with that. I feel in the game to push it forward, but I think this is a positive step for sure.
yeah. No, brilliant. Before we dive in and talk a little bit more about your leap of faith, I want to talk about that time in between, footballing stages or chapters, however you sort of want to call it. Let's talk a bit about your corporate space and the sort of skills that you learned there. I know you went to university, you studied a bachelor's degree in business marketing and sports management. How did everything in that chapter of your life set you up to, stuff that we're going to talk about in about 5 or 10 minutes?
Look, my honest answer is not much of what I learned at university did I apply later, but that's not where the value lied. The value lied in I was going to Newcastle University, mostly the Central Coast campus. I was playing with Newcastle United, which is now the Jets,
Yep.
in the NSL setup, within the National Youth League. So I was up there every single day, and if I didn't have university as part of that, right, it would have significantly changed. My whole approach to life, and my structure to life, which I think was really, really important as a footballer, to not just have football, right? And I think that's really, really important to making you a better footballer, making you a better person. To have something else that you're driving towards, stretching your thoughts and ideas. I certainly didn't think of it like that as a young kid. I just wanted to get my degree.
Mm.
But back then, I think degrees were also like just there's maybe not a lot more entrepreneurship in today,
Yeah, of
whereas
course.
degrees back then, and maybe still to a point, they're important to get, but I think they're important to get for what you learn along the way and the structure it puts in your life along the way
Mm.
and the disciplines it puts in your life beyond just the football field. So from that perspective, I thought it was really, really invaluable experience for me. And then fast forward to the corporate career,
Mm.
right? If I didn't have that degree, I probably wouldn't have got my job in
Yeah.
corporate and been able to play at the same time, right? And then everything I learned in corporate over that 10 to 14 years in big companies as well, which I was very blessed to be able to sort of fall into. My brother was in the media industry as well and helped open up doors originally in that space. But um, worked with what was called ACP Magazines, which is part of Channel 9, part of the Packer enterprise, and then moved on to Westfield, so part of Lowy and Centre Group. And I was able to do that full time in the most part whilst playing professionally part time,
Mm.
right? Which was a big balance, especially having a young family and everything else. So I've got a very patient wife along all these years, and praise God for her because that balance and her support with everything else, like it's not possible without. So, but but all of that then allowed me to then be in the space that I'm in today,
Yeah.
and and that is having the experience at corporate level, having my university degree under the belt, and having the football experience that I've had as a young player, junior, youth, from grassroots to elite into professional football, right? That is where I now sit on top of that experience today to be able to be an academy director, business owner,
Mm.
uh, founder, and be a head coach of an A League academy, youth squad, and to be able to just, I guess, play in the space that I'm passionate about and get paid for it as my occupation. So I think the time and all your experiences add up to something
Yeah, of
over a
course.
period of time.
It's your own journey.
And I didn't think that the corporate way was what I wanted to go or was ever going to go. But without that, I don't think I could have ever set up the foundations to be a business owner, to
Mm.
be honest. So, and obviously the university degree led into that corporate experience in the first place. So it all comes together in this crazy, amazing tapestry that I guess, in my opinion, through God's design only, you can look back on upon reflection and realize, oh, I see how that all works now.
Yeah.
But at the time, very, very different. But with people like you and those who have also had experiences, especially in the US, who can actually go, I've had this experience, I've seen this, and I can see it through the lens of time as well, and
Mm.
retrospectively provide advice and guidance. I think is so powerful to that next generation of player, but also their parent, who also may not have had that experience as well. So, um, yeah, that's. I think it all adds up to something in the end, and it's really powerful to sort of um, to take that experience and that knowledge and then apply it in whatever you do in the future.
Mm. No, I think you're bang on the money. You've obviously learnt a unique set of skills along the way just based off the experiences that you've had. And yeah, you allude to the US, and I can agree with that myself. There was experiences that I've had that's led me to where I am today. And without that degree, without that sort of journey, I wouldn't be in a position that, as you mentioned, been able to start a business and things like that. But I know, especially when I went through and did a bit of research, you call it the leap of faith. Talk to me about that. What did that look like? How did that feel? Especially going from, I can imagine, a corporate, comfortable setting, probably financially, to then going, okay, I'm going to pivot here, use the other experiences that I've had earlier on in my life within football to then go full time with football.
Yeah. Well, do you want me to give you the honest answer?
Yeah, I do.
So, 2017, right? That's when I took that leap of faith out of corporate and and into zero income dollars, $0 income, and having earned at that point a reasonable wage, sort of middle to senior management in a big entity like Westfield Center Group, was in hindsight, and even at the time, a crazy decision, right? I got a family of three with one on the way at that
Yeah.
particular point,
Mm.
right? And um, it was just something I felt convicted as a man of faith that God was calling me to this vocation. Simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst to go. And I fought it, and I was like, oh, what if I do this job part time and I go do that on the side? And no doors are opening up to even allow that to happen. I think
Mm.
God can work in that way, and I've seen God work in that way in my life time and time again, right? And um, and so it just got to the point where it was a leap of faith, literally connected to my faith, that it was like, no, God wants me to do this. This is my gifting, my experience, my knowledge. This is my calling, essentially.
Yeah.
Go do it, right?
Wow.
And I spoke to my wife about it at the time, and she felt the same in the end. And that's when we cut it off and finished the corporate and went into that and invested a lot of time, a lot of money, and then and eventually, in God's grace, it worked out really, really well. But that was a big leap of faith on many, many levels. But it was something I felt so convicted in my heart and my soul to do that I couldn't. The worst thing would have been for me. And I remember thinking about this. It's interesting reflecting on this over time because I haven't thought about it for a while. Been
Mm.
too busy. But reflecting on it, it was I came to the decision that I would rather make the jump and try this and lose circa $100,000, right? And not live with the what if and the regret of the what if 10 years down the line.
Yep.
That's what I came to the conclusion of as well, where I was just like, I only get one life, and I felt so convicted to do this that I needed to at least see if it was right and if it would work. And if it didn't, at least I could move on with my life, right, without any regret that I gave it the best effort that I could.
Mm.
And that was a real moment in time that I was like, let's go, let's do it. And because it was a clear separation as well, I think that really helped with me. I wasn't trying to dabble with both and everything else. I was fully all in this. And I think that made a big difference to the success that we then had immediately. And then obviously now, 8 years down the road with it all. But it was, I was convicted that that was something that I needed to do. And I didn't want to live with the regret of not listening to my heart and soul and to
Mm.
the calling that God was giving me to go all in on it.
Were you nervous? Were you scared? Because you said you got this conviction here, but like, was there not another little voice going, "Oh, I don't know about this"? Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the head comes in,
Yeah.
and the rational thought of all of this comes into play for sure.
Mm.
And that's where also, you know, in life you need to take risks to get reward, right? Generally speaking, life's pretty consistent. You only get out what you put in most things in life, right? And for me, yes, there was risk involved, but the reward was greater. And I don't mean financial reward because let me tell you, that's a hard slog in itself in terms of the vocation that I've chosen.
Mm.
Um, uh, but I mean the reward of doing something that you're passionate about, doing something that has purpose, right, connected to you. So the risk reward for me was worth taking. And someone said to me, and also I wasn't just irrational at the time. Like I spoke to a lot of people, right?
Mm.
I always try to seek feedback from people that I feel are worth receiving feedback from. And I think for me, I'm very selective with who and where I get my feedback from. I'm always listening, always alert. But when I look and ask people for feedback, it'll be very, very specific. And the people that, and not always people that I think are going to give me the information that I want, actually people who are going to give me wise counsel and conviction based on their own experience and knowledge, right? And so I rested on a lot of that, and everyone was saying to me, do it, right? And one
Really?
guy said to me,
Okay.
even in the corporate space, he said, Cam, you've got something that most of us don't have. He said, you've got a real passion for something.
Mm,
Because I don't have that. And most people I know don't have that. But if you're passionate about this, you will make it work. You'll find a way to make it work.
mm,
Because in his words, he said, you're not an idiot. So
mm.
you're smart, you got experience, you got knowledge, you're passionate about this, you'd be silly not to do it.
Yeah, wow. Fair play. It was a good decision.
It was a good decision, and but not without a lot of hard work, right? And you know
Mm.
this as a business owner, but if you a lot of that I learned through football as well, like the disciplines and the character traits that I needed inside of that. It requires hard work and persistence, um, but yeah, very very happy that I made that decision
Yeah.
in 2017.
I'm too. We'd have never met each other otherwise.
That's true. That's true. And I still remember our first cafe coffee meeting with your long
Yeah, wow.
flowing locks.
Wow. Come a long way since then, you know. And look, I'll go a little bit on that, you know. Fair play to you. You gave me a chance. I was very young in the business. Well, I think I sent you a DM. I slid into your DM, said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Can we have a chat?" And you know, a lot of other people would have opened that and gone, "Who the hell is this?" Looked at everything, gone, "No." And you know, you gave me a chance. And since then, a lot of really sound advice along the way. So I'm forever grateful for that. Thank you.
Pleasure, mate. And your work, for me, it's not a chance. When you see the person first, again, you see the potential for me, and you also see in some others the lack of potential, perhaps based on certain character traits and everything else, right? And it was a no-brainer for me when we first caught up to work and collaborate and build a friendship and a business collaboration on all these sort of things. So yeah,
Appreciate that. We'll stop getting soppy for a minute and I'll jump on the next question. But moving into the football space, right? So originally started out, you went into the MPL space first, didn't you? As well as in the private stuff, private academy space, I should say. I'm not going to go too much into depth there. And then transitioned into Spark. Like, how did you find both environments? Because obviously you've kind of done three environments now, I would call it. You've done MPL, private academy, and A League. But we've spoken a bit about A League. Let's talk about time as an MPL, TD, coach, private space. Talk to me just on the whole. What's your view on the two?
look, I mean, the main thing I would say on that, the main thing that pops into my head is the parent and the player and how they view the two. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there is just so much illogical, irrational decision making around these areas that are connected, in the most part, to FOMO, right? Fear
Okay.
of missing out.
Yep.
And the reality of the situation is the only thing that matters is the player's development and being in the right environment to develop and their love for the game, which is also connected to that environment. And the importance of getting those right at every junction from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, all the way through, doesn't end. You've always got to be in the right environment as best as you possibly can find that, in the right environment that's going to help the young player develop and keep passionate and loving the game, because those things are going to be needed to be consistent to make it, right? And our young mate Rex is a great example of that, because throughout his whole journey,
Mm.
he had a great support network with his family and his parents, particularly. He played local club football in the most part through it, but
Yep.
he kept developing and he kept loving the game.
Yep.
Right? The byproduct of that, the guy's now in a D1 US university and experiencing things that he would never ever thought were possible, right? And growing as a person, growing as a player. And for me, that's why it's like, I've got these, and it's sad. I've got kids that are 7 years old having amazing development, amazing time with us at Sparking Academy, and then they drop out at 8, right, to go and play sap JDL, and I put it in inverted commas, right? Because they just can't resist it. And they say, we know your environment's better in terms of development, in terms of support, in terms
Mhm.
of professionalism, in terms of coaching, in terms of games and a level, everything. But I just can't resist
Mhm.
this temptation and this lure here. And I think that's a sad thing. That's a sad reality because the only thing that matters, and I don't care what side they're on, what side of the fence. Doesn't matter if it's JDL SAP, doesn't matter if it's MPL, doesn't matter if it's a private academy. Actually, doesn't matter.
Yep,
Find the right environment for you and for your kid that's going to help them develop and keep loving the game at every single junction, right?
for sure.
Now, for me as well, it doesn't also need to be an either or. In fact, in most cases, it should be and needs to be a combination of of many, many things, right, to be able to help the player reach their potential. Because in the NPL space, 2 or 3 sessions a week, in most likely in a hyper team tactical environment, right, where the coaches and the clubs sadly are being driven heavily on promotion and relegation,
Mhm.
right? They're coaching the players to help the team win on the weekend, right? Which is very, very different to coaching players to develop, right? So you have to fill gaps somehow if you really want to achieve all these dreams that they've got. And what I tend to see happen is players move from a fantastic private academy environment, they then go into an NPL space, and then that's it, right? And they're like, okay, and then they regress so quickly because they're just doing 2 to 3 sessions a week in team tactical training, right? And they're scratching their heads, going touching the ball 3, 4 times in a session, whatever it might be. And then they notice that the development of their kid goes out. And this is the saddest bit I've seen time and time again, where the kid actually drops out at
Mhm.
15, 14, 15, 16 years old. I have seen so many kids do this, and then they quit the game at 15,
Oh,
16
bye.
because they don't even enjoy it in that space. So all of this desire, it's like the grass is greener on the other side. All this desire to get this holy grail, and they get there and they go, and they experience it so bad, right? That they then not only do they not develop, they actually give the game away.
Mm.
That's the sad thing. And so I think just my general thoughts around this is there is way too much thought and pressure around it all, right? You can play and train at a private academy, right? And play MPL at the same time, right? There is no reason and no one has any right to tell you other than that, right? And that's the simple fact of the matter. It is your choice as a parent, it is your choice as a player to curate your own environment, whatever that might be. And in the most part, if you want to compare yourself to players in Europe, they're training every single day, right? In their teenage years, right? Every single day. In some cases, they'll be training 2 times a day. So you just do the math on that. And if you think that 3 times a week is going to be enough to be able to play English Premier League or whatever it might be, then you're absolutely kidding yourself,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And it's important to be really, really clear with that because if you don't want to achieve that, that's also totally fine. Train 3 times a week, have a great time, enjoy yourself, play, and that's it. Just be real about what your expectations are and what you're trying to achieve, and making sure that the environment you create and curate around your kid and around yourself as a player is going to help you achieve what you want to achieve, right? And so for me, it's never been about one or the other or this or that. It's understanding what each of those provide, right? And understanding what each of the organizations and the entities inside of each of those also provide in a different way. And then, as best as you can, finding the right ones to get that mix right along the journey of it all, right?
Mm.
And that's essentially where Spark was created out of that ethos of understanding that we're not here to compete with anyone. We're here to fill gaps. We're here to support players on their development along the journey, the whole way through, right? And if we can do that, then we're going to get fantastic results for the players. And we've seen that time and time again. The key is just not being drawn into this. I have to be here to achieve something
Yeah.
wherever you may be, right? It's just about making sure that you've got the best environment around your kid, right? They're continuing to develop, they continue to grow, continue to love the game, and then ultimately when they're 17, 18, 19 years old, are they set up like a Rex to be in a position where you can now walk in and get opportunities at senior level, yeah, or beyond, that's gonna have a big impact on what happens next in their life, right? That for me is the most important thing in that whole mix and ecosystem of Australian football.
No, it's so true. And you mentioned a couple of times about like plugging gaps with what you do at Spark Football. Talk to us a bit about the methodology, the reasoning behind it, and sort of why you structure the academy in a way that is different from others, and in particular the NPL space.
Yeah, the main thing for us was to not be another football entity, another football club, another football program, right? We very, very specifically set up Spark, and nothing has changed from the start on being an environment that provides something that doesn't already exist in Australian football, and more importantly, something that young players need if they're going to be able to develop and reach their potential, right? And so the player centered approach was where we saw, to my other point earlier, that the most environments, most representative environments, MPL environments, even into the juniors, the SAP, the JDL, very, very team tactical,
Mm,
right? Very, very team tactical coaching. So um, that will get outcomes for teams on the weekend. It will definitely not get outcomes for the player longer term in terms of reaching that potential, reaching the ceiling of their potential, right?
yeah.
And so that's where we wanted to come in. The methodology then was built around that player centered approach. We then, over a period of time, created the curriculum that has, as you know, player pattern recognition at the center of it, which essentially allows the player to start reading and analyzing the game in the moment, in the game, at a much deeper level that allows them to see all the patterns that could happen on the ball, off the ball, and be quicker intellectually, like they are in Europe, to be able to make better decisions on the ball, off the ball, in transition, everything else. So,
Mm,
so we will do that, right? We obviously we play in the IFA Cup, we play in competitive football. We will do that maybe at the detriment of team results because we know and we feel that that is much more important for their longer term development. That being said, the funny thing is, if every player on the field applies what we do at a player centered level, the team stuff kind of looks after itself,
mm,
right? And that's the funny thing that we've seen. And usually it all comes back to, okay, if a team is not particularly doing particularly well, then it comes back to all the individual habits and behaviors that the individuals are not doing, right? That makes the team come together. And that's interesting. I did my A license a couple of years ago. That's definitely a direction that Ron Smith, Ian Crook, Gary Phillips, and the rest of the guys are now heading with coaching and coach education in this country as well, which is much more around the individual development as well, rather than hyper team tactical, which I think is exciting for Australian football. They use in our A license, they use the Clairefontaine Academy in France as an example of player centered development, right? And that's essentially what we've been doing at Spark for the last 5 years, and that'll continue to be our passion point and our differentiator in market as well, because we know it's needed, and we've seen results time and time again,
mm.
amazing results with our players individually, and that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I know you mentioned him a couple of times, but let's talk about Rex a little bit. Obviously, Rex is referred to us by yourself. He's had a fantastic journey throughout the US college system. He went down the junior college pathway to begin with. 2 fantastic years, a year of playing summer football in the NPSL, and he's also got another year of summer football coming up at West Texas. But he's a unique story, isn't he? Like, he wasn't your stock standard kid that went down that SAP route at 8, 9, stayed in the system, jumped around different clubs, etc. Didn't get his opportunity till late. Like, what did you see in him? Because I know you played a very influential role in his development.
Yeah, well, I just happen to know Rex since he was 7, 8 years old, right? And being still lives just around the corner from us. He was the same age as my daughter. They went to the same primary school, and I remember the first time I saw Rex at the local club, doesn't exist anymore, called Bannockburn Rovers. He was probably about maybe 9 years old.
Hmm.
And I was like, this kid has a lovely left foot, and he's good on the dribble, and he's good on the pass. It's interesting, like looking at that now, because he was never given the opportunity beyond that, and he could have easily played NPL, right? along that journey. There's no question. But he was probably, I think, a late developer as well. He was probably a bit smaller. He's now quite tall, but he was smaller and things like that. And there's many reasons why you don't get picked in the local rep team or NPL team, right? And he did trial. I spoke to him about it. I think he tried once or twice, never worked out. And then I think he was like, well, there's no point, right? So, but it didn't stop him continuing to develop, and it didn't stop his love for the game. He had a great group of friends around him that they all loved playing together. They all loved playing their football together. His dad and his mum were very supportive, and his dad was quite influential at a footballing level, with building that passion and continuing to feed into it. And it was around about COVID that they called me up and they said, what are we going to do with Rex? Like, he's coming to the end, I think, of his schooling, and they're like thinking about, he just loves football, but he's never had an opportunity to play at any level. And that's where, before then getting him to you guys, we got him into berries, also through our network with Andrew, and he trialed for like 6 weeks or something there
Mm.
before he got his first crack in under 18. So he went all the way through, never played youth, representative football, NPL football, but his passion maintained, his development maintained, and he didn't have to have those environments,
Mm.
which is the important point, right? To keep those two things happening. And that goes back to my earlier point, is what's the most important thing here,
Yep.
right? And it has to be development and love for the game. And he's a great example of that. And you know what else he did? He filled his gaps. He trained with us in a private academy setting as well. He was also down at the Oval, right, especially through COVID, and he put hours upon hours upon hours into his game,
Mm.
right? And that's what most kids just don't understand these days. Like, you have to put the time in outside of structured sessions. You have to. That's why we created the Spark Football app, right? Because what we realize is we've got all this knowledge and experience. We can guide and direct players, right? But ultimately, if they really want to make it, and this was my story as well, you need to be down the park every single day, right? Or close there too. And you need to be working on the right stuff
100%.
with a little bit of direction that's going to help you advance your game and keep the disciplines in place to visualize the successes and the moments you're trying to recreate on the football field,
Mm.
inside the game. And Rex did all those things,
Yep.
right? And his parents kept supporting him. And then, yeah, one day, then funny how it all works. Then my youngest was playing mini roos,
Yep.
with then the new club, which is Taramara now, because Bankburn was gone. Mum and dad, Rex's parents, are on the barbecue there because they've always been supporters of the club, and they're just chatting. The same conversation was happening. We'd had a few chats around this, as I said, when they called me up, and I said my son then was now playing mini roos next to us, and we got a sausage sanger, and I said, look, have you considered the US? Like, I got a coach with us at Spark. His name's Dylan. He runs a recruitment slash setup to help feed players into the US college system. Have you ever considered that? Because, by that stage, he now cracked it at Berries.
Yep.
He'd been given his opportunity. He was playing 18s. I think he'd even got some first grade, but
Yeah.
he was much older,
Yep.
and so probably older by the standards of what would normally come to you in terms of feeding players into the US system. But in the space of about a week, I think you saw his video. Um, they then started considering things, and I honestly think it was about between 1 or 2 weeks that you turned this around, miraculously, and he had an offer or two on the table,
Mm.
and then within the space of a month, he was gone.
Yeah. It
And
was very
um,
last minute, wasn't it?
but it's funny how it happens, because those sliding door moments. Imagine we were 2 weeks later than that, it may not have ever happened, because it would have
Yeah.
been, it started, spots gone, everything
Well,
else.
no.
But this is why as well, in our football parent program, which is also now in the app, talk about the importance of network,
Mm.
right? And the importance um, of having the right people around you and sounding boards and things like that, because that's how doors are opened up
Yeah, of
more
course.
so than any perceived pathway,
Yeah.
right? Network is actually the pathway.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and and that's how it all came to fruition for Rex. But importantly, that network and those opportunities and everything that happened would have never existed unless he kept developing, kept loving the game,
So true.
he kept working hard, and he had a great support, family network and parents around him that enabled that to happen in his way and in his timing,
Mm.
which I think is testament to that story.
Yeah, it is a beautiful story, one of, great sort of love and support by his parents, good people around him, and it's so nice that it's not just the traditional kid that's gone through the system start to finish, and he's now finished in a position, and you got to take your hat off to Rex, like he's the one that has worked his socks off for this opportunity, and he's done all the little things over there. He's followed the advice that's been put in front of him. He's performed, he's excelled. Like next year, Cam, you're going to be flicking on ESPN on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. and you're going to be watching him run around. Like, that's pretty special
That's
in
awesome.
its own little way as well, I think. But look, obviously we've gone down the route of the US a little bit. Now having your experience in all the different fields, and we've obviously worked with a couple of other players that have gone through Spark and have gone over to America. What sort of footballer does it suit in this country, and why to go down that path, do you think?
Opportunity. So the biggest difference when I went to the UK and my manager slash advisor slash agent said to me, Cam, all you need to do is get on the rung and in the system as the lowest level professional player in the game. That's all we need to do to start with, right? Because in England, they've now got maybe even more, 100 professional clubs.
Mm,
Well, that is the biggest difference between Australia and most parts of the world, right? Our young players do not have access to such vast opportunities of professional football, right? And so you have to, therefore, the opportunities are limited. So you've got to actually think about, of all the players who make it in this country, how many could have played at that same level or could have done more or whatever it might be,
mm,
just because we simply do not have enough professional environments for them to lead into. So the opportunity that exists for me within US and the opportunity for players to continue that journey into the US, right, is so important for Australian players to think about and consider because we do not have the professional
mm.
opportunities here on volume like they do in the UK and Europe.
Yep.
And it's an interesting perspective to look at because we all put Europe and the UK on this pedestal of making it, and it would be a huge achievement to make it, right?
So true. And you and I have spoken about this a number of times. Australian football, we live in like a funnel, don't we? You get to 20s, and I see a lot of really good players drop out the game. Like moving up this way, I played in the Central Coast Premier League, and I think last year running around with a bloody cricket pitch in the middle of the field with a kid that was in the Joeys, only a couple of years ago, and you just sort of scratch your head and you go, wow, the opportunities really are limited. If you're not in an A League academy and getting seen, it's really hard to break in. It's that simple, and we sort of try and educate parents and athletes on what the pathway looks like. We talk a lot about the pyramid, the leagues that feed into those professional leagues. We talk all about the amount of different programs there are in the college system, and it'd be nice if we had a similar sort of university system here in Australia that did mirror the NPL and did provide more opportunities. But I think we're a while away from that just yet. Well, mate, thank you so much for today. As we mentioned halfway through that little soppy moment, I got a lot of time for you, a lot of respect, and I appreciate everything that you've done with me, off the park and on the park. I've obviously been, big in my coaching space as well, and it's been fantastic to have you on the pod. Really enjoyed learning a little bit more about your journey, and yeah, look forward to maybe doing another one in the future.